There were some common questions that came up in class on Wednesday afternoon that I thought I would kind of summarize some of the answers. This is meant to be also helpful for the Wednesday night class since we weren't able to have class. So um, let's start with migrations. So it's pretty common to end up in a situation where maybe you didn't label, didn't use the right data type for some field, and you want to change it. So one way to do that is to go back and edit the migration file itself, but that's generally not a bad idea for the following reasons. It may affect later migration. So if this is a migration that was 3 migrations back, and then you decide to change it, you have a problem. Um, a lot of times you might end up having to migrate the database down first and then edit the migration, because otherwise the method that you use to migrate down might fail because you've changed some of the fields. And that's actually a fairly common situation. So um, if you do decide to edit a migration, the best thing to do is probably drop the database altogether and then just recreate it. So for Postgres, that means doing a DB drop followed by a DB create, and then do a DB migration. The better approach, and certainly one that you want to use in production, is to create a new migration, not a scaffold migration, but just a migration that modifies the table in the way that you want. So as you know, you can do in a migration anything that you can do in a SQL alter table statement. So you can add a column, remove a column, whatever you want to do there, change data types. Um, there are some limitations. So the scaffold generator creates all the views when you do that original thing, but when you do a migration, it does not modify any of the views or the controller. So there's 2 things that you have to do if you're going to perhaps, or for example, add a field. The first is that you're going to modify the form, the show page, and the index views to add that new field. Right? It's not going to show up just all by itself, so you have to go in and modify those 3 files. And then the second thing you need to do is modify the controller so that it allows those parameters to come through. So I've got an example here. If I wanted to, say I did a migration on this consumer so that I added maybe a last name or an address, I would need to come in here and add that. If I don't do that, then when I try to submit the form, it's not going to be let through because this is a whitelist. So it only lets through what you have put in here specifically. So make sure you do that. If you ever find yourself saying, well, I know I'm submitting the form, but nothing is happening in the database, most likely it is this problem. Okay, continuing on. Appointment scheduling. So in the Salon application, you need to make sure that you can't schedule an appointment at the same time for the same employee. It just wouldn't make any sense. So there's a couple different methods to handle that. Looks like got a typo in my slide here. So a couple different methods to do it. One is to make all the appointments 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever, but some fixed amount of time, and then only allow the user to select on the hour. Again, if you're using a 1 hour increment. When you do that, you only need a start time, and you can avoid any overlap simply by not allowing them to book 2 appointments at 1 p.m., for example. So setting that fixed time solves the problem for you. That's one method to do it. Another method is you could have a start and an end time for the appointment, but in this case you're going to need to, every time you let them create a new appointment, what you have to do is check that time to see if it is in the midst, in other words, if it's in between the start and end time of another appointment. This is certainly doable, but it is a little more complicated. And in both cases, you could do this validation, you could just do this as a validation in your employee or in your appointment uh, class. Either one of those works. It's one you may find one a little bit easier than the other, but method one is probably the easiest. The thing that does not work is just allowing them to set an appointment at any given time, or um, because as you can see in the slide here, I could pick 1 p.m. and then I could pick 1:01. Well, certainly those are going to be overlapping, and you can't have 1-minute appointments. So if you're going to just stick with just a start time, you need to do something to constrain the times that they can do it, and then um, make sure that you document it. Employee scheduling. So you can decide to make an employee schedule simply as the list of appointments. In other words, I've got 3 appointments today, I've got 3 appointments tomorrow. When I show the schedule, it just shows those things. The other way to do it, if you want, is to have a schedule that says, Susan is going to be there Monday through Wednesday from 8 to 5, and on Thursday from 1 to 4. That's fine if you want to do that. If you do that, though, when you create a new appointment, what you need to do is make sure that the appointment for that employee cannot be scheduled at a time when they are not on the schedule. They're not working, right? So it's a little bit of extra work to do it that way. I don't have a preference in terms, and there's no requirement for you to do it one way or the other. Just choose what you would like to do, or what you think would be the right thing to do, and implement it that way. Employee pay. This is another thing that came up. Each employee appointment, rather, should have a service provided, haircut, hair coloring, whatever, and that needs to have a fee associated with it. So you can choose any of a number of different ways to pay the employee. You could do it as a percent of the service fee. This is actually the way that real salons work. If you go in for a haircut and it's $25, the person doing the haircut may get 50% of that, maybe even less. Depends on the particular salon. You could have them get the entire service fee. That's a little less realistic, but it's it wouldn't be unheard of, I guess. But you could do that. And then the third would be an hourly wage. So if you do an hourly wage, then all you need to do is calculate the number of hours that they actually worked, and print it out. You need to be able to do this employee pay both as a report based on year to date and selectable by date. The way I would probably go about doing this is, in my employee class, have a method called payment, or payment between dates, or payment due, whatever you want to call it. And then inside that, assuming that you have an employee has many appointments and then each appointment has a service, you could do something like this code that's shown right here, where you've got employee.appointments.each due, and then you're just adding this up. Now obviously you've got to create a variable called sum and put it up here someplace. And this assumes that you have a relationship between the appointment and the service has a field called fee. So obviously you need to adapt this to whatever you've done in your schema. But if I were going to do this, I'd probably do it that way and put this in my employee class. So the important thing out of all of this is document what you're going to do, or how your app is supposed to work. That's what I'm going to be going by when we grade it. If you decided to have all appointments 1 hour long, say that specifically in your documentation. On the pay rate, if you said employee is based on 30% of the service charge, say that in the documentation. And here in the documentation, I'm talking about the user manual, because that's the way that you would want somebody to use your software, right? If they use their software, they need to understand what it's doing. From a practical standpoint, when I grade it, what I'm going to do is look at the manual, and then I'm going to try what you say it does. And if you say all appointments are 1 hour long, then I'm going to verify that I can't make a 30-minute appointment or an overlapped appointment. And the same way with the pay. If I look at a pay report, it should follow whatever formula you set in here. If it's, you know, they have to, they get entirely all of the service charge, or they're on a salary, or they get some percentage. I'm going to be looking for the math to make sense on that. So these were some of the major questions that came up on Wednesday afternoon, and I hope this helps clarify some things for you.